Welcome to the webinar on the collaboration across education and child protection in emergencies. We apologize for the technical glitch that we had before starting, and thanks for your patience. It's great to see already over 50 of you who have remained online to join us today. My name is Hani Mansourian, and I'm the co-coordinator of the Alliance for Child Protection and Humanitarian Action. And I've had the privilege of being part of this collaboration since the early on. I just wanted to open by kind of doing a little recap of where we started and when we have come to. Of course, this idea of collaboration across two sectors, it's not new. Those of you who may have been around for a couple of decades in this work may remember that a lot of organizations actually used to have child protection and education as being part of the same kind of sector internally within the organization. So it's not a new idea. But it is being taken to a different level, I believe, with some of the efforts that Alliance, the INEE, and many other actors are doing to really elevate the status of this and the importance of this collaboration. About 5 years ago, almost exactly 5 years ago, I think it was July 2016, when I had some conversations with Dean Brooks, the director of INEE. I did not realize that 5 years later we would have so much to show for this collaboration that seeds for which were planted at that moment in those conversations. In 2018, so about 2 years later, we had a very interesting roundtable in Nairobi across the two sectors, which at the time I thought, if the time we have spent to discuss only brings this as an outcome, I'm very happy with it. Then later, it just kept getting better and better. As my father would say, this kind tree kept on giving. We had the fortune to be able to raise enough resources to hire Mark to lead on this initiative across child protection and education for us. And then COVID happened. And as you know, COVID led to a lot of issues, both for the education sector and for the child protection sector. And I really feel like the importance of this collaboration and the work that we have been doing, along with many others, kind of came to light during that time. And the weighing up the risk paper that I hope all of you have seen, which was the result of that collaboration, that really outlined the risks for children of not considering protection and education concerns when you're making decisions about closure of schools because of a pandemic, can seriously jeopardize the well-being of children. It really highlighted this issue, and it changed the conversation in terms of school closures. And I would like to believe that it had serious impact in how a lot of policymakers and governments thought about this going forward. Of course, it doesn't mean that everything changed after that, but it really kind of contributed to a different conversation. Today, we'll be talking about the position paper that this collaboration across INEE and Alliance has been able to produce to really outline their position in terms of what we believe as the two leading networks in the two sectors needs to happen to better protect children and ensure the well-being of children. Now, I'm going to say something that may come as a bit of a shock to some of you, but I wanted to, before I hand over back the floor, I wanted to take a moment to really appreciate the work that Mark has done, because unfortunately, Mark Chappell will not be with us beyond the end of this month. He will be moving on to really interesting and exciting opportunities, but it's definitely a loss for us. he really has done an amazing amount of work, but also the quality of work in the past couple of years that we have been together. I believe that our sectors will both, education and child protection, be indebted to Mark for all the work that he has done. He relentlessly advocated for this, brilliantly analyzed the available information, and masterfully synthesized them into usable public goods that we can all use to do a better job in our own work, but also to support children's well-being and healthy development. Mark, we will really miss you, but we hope we can keep you engaged in our work, in your future endeavors. And with that, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the position paper, which I've read, and every time I've read it, I've learned new things. And over to you, Mark.
You're on mute, Mark. You're muted.
Thank you, Hani. Thank you so much for that. And huge apologies to everyone for the technical issues we've had with our Zoom account today, but hopefully all will be well now. Yes, and huge thanks to Hani and Kate and the rest of the advisory group, many of whom are on the call today, for supporting this work over the last, it's not even been 2 years, Hani, it's been about not quite 18 months, about 15 months. Yeah, it feels like we've really helped move the dial forward in terms of cross-sector collaboration, and hopefully that momentum will continue. And yes, Hani, as you said, hopefully I'll be able to remain involved in this work going forward. Just a couple of quick points around the webinar and the webinar housekeeping. The audio and video for participants are disabled. We have a Q&A function you'll find at the bottom of the screen, and you can put questions in there, and also questions in the chat. We will try to monitor that as well at the same time. Please indicate to whom your question is addressed, whether it's to me or any of the other panelists that come up after this presentation. The session's been recorded and the closed captioning is available. Again, you'll see options at the bottom of the site. The recording for this website, for this webinar, and the presentations will be available on the INEE website after the fact. I know some of the panelists have also got some slides which we might not be able to share, but they will be put on their website as well for information. So today we're going to present on the position paper. As Hani said, this really synthesizes evidence that was gathered over the last year or so to set out the rationale for collaboration cross-sector and some very concrete ideas for field level collaboration. Then we'll move into a panel discussion with some guests who very kindly joined us to talk about really making collaboration happen at all levels. So some practical examples from a colleague working in a regional office, a colleague working in a country office at field level, and a colleague working at a global level for a donor. I'm really looking at how we can make collaboration cross-sector a reality and what they're doing to support that. Then there's the Q&A, and as I said, please put your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom or in the chat, and please indicate to whom your question is addressed. So Hani's actually covered most of my first slides, which is great. He's mentioned about INEE The Alliance and why we came together on this project. Just quickly to note, it's overseen by a multi-agency advisory group made up of donors, field level agencies, national organizations, international NGOs, and UN bodies, and really proactive in supporting me in this work. Overall objectives for the project are closer collaboration between actors at all levels in the humanitarian program cycle and every stage in the response. And ultimately, what we hope is that this will lead to improve well-being of children and youth affected by emergencies, crisis, and forced displacement, because we believe that collaboration cross-sector will result in improved services. So within this project over the last 15 months, Hani's touched on a lot of the products that we've produced. I won't go through them now, but there's a web page on both INEE and the Alliance thematic areas that highlight all these resources, and it will be in this presentation that will be shared afterwards. One key thing to flag, that we're in development of a collaboration toolkit for practitioners, which we'll be piloting in the next month or so, and then go to wider pilot and dissemination towards the end of the year. And so please keep an eye out for that. And it's based off the position paper we're discussing today. So this position paper has come out from a comprehensive desk review with 35 key informants from field level practitioners to global donors to academics, really trying to look at why we should be doing cross-sector collaboration, what are the benefits of it, and in what way can we make this a practical reality. And this paper has been through multiple stage reviews by key stakeholders on the advisory group, also within INEE and the Alliance working groups. So I want to touch on the key findings, then I'll look at some of the recommendations, and I'll try to move quickly, but not too quickly. So some of the main key findings we found were that integrating child protection programs into education programs can help mitigate protection risks, improve overall child well-being, and lead to better educational outcomes. So it makes sense to make education programs more protective. If we look at child protection programming, if we can support child protection practitioners to have an education focus in their work, this can also increase enrollment and retention in education programming, and also increase the overall well-being of the child. Joint and integrated programming supports and encourages a child-centered approach to humanitarian response. So this prevents children and young people slipping through the gaps between services. If you're looking at a holistic view of the child, a whole spectrum view, then the two sectors will work together to stop children slipping through the gaps. From a donor perspective, joint and integrated programming can be a cost-effective model, and it can also prevent duplication in some contexts. One of the things to flag is that the evidence of the added value of joint and integrated programming in crisis contexts in particular does exist, but it's limited. So we have lots of evidence from other contexts globally of why integrated joined-up programming works and should be endorsed, but we need more evidence in crisis contexts as well. Globally, there's been a number of efforts recently to transform the way humanitarian delivery takes place, including the UN-endorsed new way of working, the efforts and the conversation around bridging the humanitarian development nexus, and also the localization agenda. And cross-sector collaboration lines up with all of these. So it's really a way of supporting the transformation of the aid sector. One thing to bear in mind is that schools and other learning centres may not always be protective. There's the risk of an assumption that a school is always a safe place, but they may actually be the source of child protection risks. Another reason why collaboration across sectors needs to take place and includes a focus on safety and risk mitigation in learning centres. So the recommendations that came out of this paper, I encourage you to read it all in detail. It's hosted on INEE and the Alliance websites. We're calling on implementing agencies, networks, clusters, donors, and government ministries to design, implement, and invest in collaboration between the two sectors. We also call on donors to invest in further analysis, evaluation, and research to build on the evidence of the added value of joint and integrated programming, specifically in crisis contexts, because that's the body of evidence we need to build to help make the case for joint integrated programming in emergencies more compelling. Many agencies have developed guidelines for joint and integrated programming for their internal use, and some of these are excellent and were drawn on for the paper. But we found there's a clear need for an operational framework that systemizes collaboration between the two sectors, and very much at field level. And that's the framework we're working on and developing at the moment. And that's in response to the key informants, but also the advisory group and broader discussions with INEE and Alliance members. The gap is really at practitioner level. What resources are there to help us do integrated and joint programming? One thing to bear in mind, which came through the research, that many existing guidelines focus on integrated child protection into education. Even, for example, Standard 23 in the CPMS is very much focused on making education a more protective and safer environment. And there's also a need for guidelines that support child protection practitioners to link their specialized programming with improving access to and retention in education. Another kind of recommendation is for joint theory of change and associated indicator framework to be developed to help better collaboration, which is grounded in the 2 sets of minimum standards. And overall, what we found is using a rights-based, well-being focused approach that promotes healthy development, helps us put children really at the center of our programming, and we can build our programming out from that. So, as I mentioned, within the position paper, we've taken an approach which I think is quite common in child protection, but less common in education. And that's the socioecological model, which really starts from the child, what is needed to support holistic development, healthy development and well-being of that child. So it starts with the child and moves out in concentric circles, looking at the family, in this case, the school, but it could be other elements of society there, the broader community, and then the policy at a national level. And really, when we're thinking about programming, designing, delivering programming, we put child wellbeing and healthy development at the center of this. And bear in mind, children themselves don't see sectors. They don't necessarily see, we want this education program, we want this protection program. They have their needs, they have their desires, and they have their rights. And by designing joint and integrated programming, we can hope to meet those without necessarily being confined to one sector. So one of the things that came out within the paper, we were really looking at practical tools and practical ways of doing joint and integrated programming. And in the position paper, we've kind of listed these out, and these are going to be built on with tools, with links to resources and some high-level guidelines, all grounded in the standards. This is going to come out in the framework, which comes out later this year. So just wanted to touch on these with you today to really start the thinking. The MHPSS, including structured and unstructured PSS, social emotional learning and psychological first aid, are for many education agencies, this is a key area where overlap occurs between the sectors. We also would expect nearly as standard now that any education program would include multi-sector referral pathways. So referring girls and boys at risk into specialized child protection services, but also referrals from child protection services, working with children out of school at risk of dropout, referring them into formal and non-formal education provision. Working with communities is key, with community outreach and awareness, so supporting community level child protection approaches, awareness raising child protection, hazard risk education, and also awareness raising and mobilization around education, enrollment and retention. Caregivers in the second circle of the socio-ecological framework are a vital component in child wellbeing, healthy development, and in educational attainment. So both sectors need to work with the caregivers to ensure that they're in a strong position to support their child's development. In-class child protection messaging for and about children, which would include prevention of exploitation, separation and trafficking, understanding child protection and child abuse in general, and also disaster risk reduction, such as my-risk education. In contexts where there's conflict and violence, conflict-sensitive education, peace education, and a conflict sensitivity approach are critical to avoid any intervention, education or protection inflaming existing tensions and working towards community cohesion. Safe learning environment access routes, it's key for successful education programming. Children need to feel safe on their way to and from school, and schools themselves need to be free from hazards and encourage learning. The sector expertise needs to come together to support teacher training curricula that will support more proactive, protective learning environments. Agencies, again, working together to develop safeguarding feedback and reporting mechanisms that children recognize, understand, and can use. It's important that teacher well-being or educational staff well-being, as well as child protection staff well-being, is recognized, encouraged, and supported. Learning environments must be kept free from occupation and attack by armed groups. which can be supported with protection colleagues through community negotiation and reported on through the MRM process. And accessibility, non-discrimination, as well as gender are key underpinning principles for any programming, ensuring school enrollment access are inclusive to all children regardless of ability, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual identity, or other characteristic. And then we look at some other components which perhaps might traditionally sit in child protection programming. And so, for example, child labour and other harmful traditional practices like child marriage, FGM, defined gender roles, where protection practitioners will be working to support children to come out of the workplace or to prevent early marriage, but they're also making sure they make that key connection to enrollment in and retention in education provision, so that this programming is joined up and children can access education as their right, but also support the cognitive development that is key to healthy development and well-being. Two sectors can work together around problems with school integration, which might be language barriers, might be access barriers, particularly for refugee communities. There may be additional challenges around health and disability, children with disabilities or underlying health conditions. By taking a multi-sector approach, we can support them to access appropriate education services. Lack of appropriate documentation for enrollment in education provision, again, is an area where protection practitioners with their expertise can work hand in hand with education practitioners to advocate for either provision of temporary documentation or for relaxation of the policies which are creating these barriers. And then social protection or cash and voucher assistance is also a cross-sector opportunity to improve access to and attendance in education programming. So one of the things I think might be helpful for each attendee here to take away with them is think about these two questions. What barriers are there within your organization and your programs to closer collaboration between the sectors? And then how can you encourage joint or integrated programming in your agency or in your way of working? Or how would you adapt your current programming to make it more collaborative, to move it towards joint or integrated programming models? So I know I've spoken a lot and been through a lot of slides, but that's a summary of the position paper to date and how we like to approach this work between INEE and the Alliance. For more information, those of you who aren't signed up, please go to INEE and the Alliance, where you can sign up to mailing lists and choose your preferences and get more information on both networks and this initiative in particular. I'd now like to hand over to Dr. Kate Moriarty for INEE to introduce the panel and to take us into a conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks everybody. Just to say, just a little reflection on time. We're obviously, because the technical difficulties, a little bit squished for time, a little bit short on time. So, but definitely want to leave some time for audience questions at the end, but also give time to our panelists. So let me start first of all by saying thank you to Mark. It's a really comprehensive summary of the position paper. There's a lot of information. So hopefully you would have read the paper, but also we can dig down into some of these issues a little bit more during our panel discussion. So let me introduce our panelists. I'll introduce all of them first of all, and then after that, I'll invite each of them to reflect on some of the issues and ideas Mark has raised in relation to this work, to their work at the field, regional and global levels. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Elise de la Coudray, who's Child Protection and Gender-Based Violence Information Officer at UNHCR East Africa Regional Team. I'd also like to introduce Kunja Mayubila, who's the Education and Child Protection Coordinator at the International Rescue Committee in Cameroon, and Kelly Lauer, who's a Programme Officer at the Bureau for Population, Refugees and Migration, which is part of the US government. And also Mark will come back and join the panel. So thanks to all of our panelists, and please do our panelists put your cameras on when you're speaking. And if I can start with you, Ali. Elise. We've heard from Mark about the key areas of collaboration outlined in the position paper. And I wonder if you can explain to us why cross-sector collaboration is important to UNHCR when working with refugee populations, and how the UNHCR East Africa team is addressing this. So if I can hand over to you.
Hi, thank you very much, Kate. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you very well.
Great, okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Alice. It was really exciting to hear Mark's introduction, because secretly I was going, yes, yes, yes. You were hitting a lot of the points that we like to hear about in terms of refugees, because of so many of the challenges that are faced. So in terms of the region for East Africa, Horn and Great Lakes, we really cover a lot of these areas. And recently, through a stronger collaboration with our colleagues in the education unit, we brought together child protection and education, that although we sit separately, we are working closer and closer together, both with our partnerships through other organizations, with the UNICEF through the Blueprint, which has really made a difference to this, also at the regional bureau level, but also at the country level. So in March, earlier this year, we came together and we had a joint webinar and a collaboration between the two sectors. And for this, we also invited the country operations, the teams, and from this rich dialogue, we were able to come up with 8 key areas that we wanted to collaborate on more closely and more purposefully than perhaps we had been doing before. I think Mark made a very good point, and Hani before him, that these are areas and work that we've been doing for a long time, but sometimes you need that additional intention, that additional purpose to then drive the work forward, and to also see where there are gaps and see where just a little bit of extra effort can bring some really good collaboration. So for our region, we wanted to focus on 8 areas: coordination, communication and joint advocacy, contextualization and accountability, MHPSS and the referral pathways, out-of-school youth, safe learning environments, age, gender diversity, and finally, WASH and menstrual hygiene management. For refugee children, which is the predominant caseload for UNHCR, although we work also, of course, with IDP communities, but for both IDPs and refugees, often these are situations of emergency. And usually UNHCR, given, I mean, if perhaps we think about the Tigray situation at the moment and a couple of the other crises in the region of Eastern Horn of Africa, UNHCR can be both one of the first actors on the ground, but also one of the bigger ones that then other groups will come around. So we have to be prepared to offer some structure and offer some leadership, but we definitely do not have the tools, and we do not have all of the resources to do everything that cannot be done. None of us can work in isolation, so the collaboration is very, very important. So, I mean, the region that we cover has so many varied contexts, but I think if I can just hop from some of the points that Mark raised, because I think for refugee children, this is particularly important, is that their legal status or their lack of legal status is one of the key protection challenges. If we think of children who do not have a right to register to seek asylum, who are not yet entered into asylum processes, they are effectively undocumented, and their right to remain legally on the territory is already compromised. So unfortunately, as the protection environment around the world gets more restricted, this becomes more of a challenge. So any opportunities where we can bring children into national systems has really been one of the core areas that we're looking at. And this also enhances our partnership with UNICEF, who have a long-standing work with working with governments and building or capacitating rather the national system. So UNHCR, we're kind of moving, we have been for some time, from sort of a more of a substitution role, providing these parallel services to integrating and making sure that refugee children can benefit from that. And one of the key areas is on documentation. So schools and education can sometimes provide one of the rare opportunities for children to obtain documentation, to get certification, and to have some kind of proof of participation in their host community. And this can then have incredible implications later on for regularizing their status, or perhaps enjoying other status, and even maybe eventually local integration. So I think I'll stop there and wait for some questions later. Thank you.
Thanks, Elisa. That's really interesting. And I think if, maybe, I'm not sure if everybody, I was really interested in the 8 areas that you outlined for closer collaboration, and also really good to hear about the particular challenges facing refugee children, and not to forget IDP children. So thank you very much. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions and a lot that we can discuss. And maybe now, though, I can move to Kunja, and so welcome, Kunja. Just to kind of, set your comments in context. We've heard from Mark about the rationale for collaboration, and then on the work of UNHCR and some of their kind of, 8 areas, and why they see this as important. I think Elisa said that, you can't work in isolation. So it would be really interesting to hear about the joint cross-sector programming that IRC are bringing to your work in Cameroon. So, I wonder if you can explain a little bit the approach to your work, and also how this collaboration came about, and possibly why you consider it a success story. So Kunja, if I could give you the floor. Do come on camera if you're able to. We can't hear you, Kunja. I don't know if you're having trouble unmuting.
Hello.
Oh, great. Thanks. So yeah, please, we'd be really interested to hear from you about the work you're doing in Cameroon.
Yeah. Hello.
Hi, yeah, we can hear you now, if you want to go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Kate, and thanks to all for joining this webinar. I'm really excited to participate and share some ground activities with all. The International Rescue Committee, in partnership with the European Commission of Humanitarian Aid Operations, ECHO, is implementing a 3-year project called PEACE across Nigeria, Niger, and Cameroon. PEACE stands for Protective and Adaptive Education Approaches for Children in Emergencies. But for this webinar, we will be focusing on Cameroon. In Cameroon, the project is being implemented in the conflict-affected areas of the far north of the region. In these areas, most of children do not go to school, and for the ones who are already in schools, staying in school is not easy. It is really, it is very challenging. IRC and ECHO understand, in order to address the educational needs of children in conflict-affected areas, such as the far north of Cameroon, there is a need to put together education and child protection. And they think that when children are provided with the right support, such as safe and quality educational opportunities, the negative effects of hardship and stress are mitigated, and they can heal, grow, and learn, and even thrive. The PEACE project takes an integrated education and child protection approach to support school-aged girls and boys living in targeted sites to access educational opportunities and improve both academic and social emotional skills in safe, functional schools and learning spaces. This is done with a focus on flexible adaptation and innovation of programs using 4 core models. The first model, the model A, the acute response, it is called the safe healing learning space. So there is a toolkit that was developed by IRC for this, and we built on this toolkit to set up 3 SHLS. I will be talking about a lot about SHLS, which is the safe healing learning spaces. So we set up 3 SHLS in 2 divisions. These SHLS are meant for vulnerable out of school children, enabled to access other education opportunities, mainly due to recent displacement. The implementation of the learning component of SHLS is supported by the Ministry of Education, whilst its socio-emotional part is supported by the Ministry of Social Affairs. So that's an example of how we bring together the 2 ministries, the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Social Affairs. The second model, the model B, it is the catch-up classes or tutoring for children who have been out of school for a short period of time, or those at risk of dropouts in formal schools. They will benefit from catch-up classes to support them to re-enter or succeed in schools. So far, we don't yet have this model in Cameroon. The third one is the model C, accelerated learning programs for out of school children who are older and longer term out of school children. The aim of this program is to enable them to reintegrate into formal schools within their age group. IRC will be implementing an accelerated learning program in Cameroon this year using a recognized curriculum. The fourth and the last model, the model D, is the support we provide to formal schools for children who are attending formal schools with limited capacity of infrastructures, including in area experiencing displacement. For the first year, IRC supported 7 formal schools in the northern part of Cameroon through a range of interventions, such as targeted support to teachers, potential expansion of space, and basic materials. This enables teachers and children to welcome students safely in schools. For these 4 models to be implemented successfully, IRC supports caregivers and community engagement, and teachers professional development, all with a focus on safety and learning. An early warning system plan was developed for all the targeted schools with whom we work, and we put in place a referral mechanism in all these schools. I mean the 7 targeted schools and we put in place an individual case management mechanism to provide vulnerable children and their families with services they need. There is also a group psychosocial which is organized in all these schools. But now, how are children targeted for the above models? I mean the 4 models. So in fact, CP staff need to target out of school children, including working children, children with disabilities, married children, children in need to participate in all SHLS activities. These include learning activities, socio-emotional children, child protection case management. That's does the contribution of the CPA staff, and in the other hand, we have education staffs who identifies children at risk to refer to CP colleagues. This could include children at risk of dropout, children at risk of violence, abuse, neglect, and exploitation. As the main success of the program, I think we are able to have in place a good coordination between the two teams, and we have staff members performing roles in both sectors. Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you, Kunja. That was really interesting, and interesting to hear that you have, like just what you were saying at the end, that you have, you know, not only the collaboration between the two teams, but also staff that bridge the sector, a bit like Mark's role has been between INEE and the Alliance. And I also thought it was like really interesting to hear, you know, like the, so if I get it right, the safe healing learning spaces. And as you kind of stressed right at the beginning, and that kind of relates back to what Mark was saying about, you know, the goal here is really to put the child at the center. And I think you said for children to heal, grow, learn and thrive, which I think is really important. So, you know, thank you so much for sharing, you know, the work of the program, and also explaining how you identify children, because I think that's also an important point of collaboration. Maybe moving on from that, I can turn to Kelly and ask Kelly to, you know, thinking about what you've heard from the other panelists and Mark, and maybe, you know, you can talk, explain to us a little bit about why joint programming is important in the work that the PRM are doing. Thanks, Kelly, over to you.
Great. So thank you for inviting me to join this discussion today. And I really just want to echo much of what my colleagues have already said. You know, we share your viewpoints that these two sectors are ripe for greater collaboration. And as a donor, we're really keen to support partners in implementing these recommendations. So from the donor perspective, we see joint programming as a way to leverage limited resources and support our shared goal of improved child well-being between these two sectors. And so we know, you know, as we've talked about already today, that supporting standalone education or protection programming often results in children unable to learn in the classroom without the additional support they need, or leaves children left out of the classroom altogether, struggling in their communities. But we also know that the competition for these resources to conduct this programming is high, and that funding for each of these sectors can really vary from donor to donor, which can sometimes further disincentivize joint planning and programming. And so, which is why PRM is really committed to supporting effective approaches by bringing these two sectors together within our own programming, but also really encouraging other donors to share this approach as well. So for PRM, our mandate is protection, and we can see greater protection outcomes for all children when these two sectors can come together and leverage one another's resources and expertise. So we're doing this in a couple of different ways. And, you know, first of all, we're really proud to have supported the development of this position paper, and are really hopeful to sort of see kind of where this evolves and how it will translate in implementation. And the second is that PRM really is funding programs and partners through two main avenues, which is our UN partner appeals and through NGO funding opportunities. And so we are really increasing our strategic engagement with our essential partners, including UNHCR and UNICEF, because we recognize that in order to move this agenda forward, this joint planning must happen in the development of humanitarian appeals in order to result in joint programming. And so we're really trying to, you know, advocate and use all of our diplomatic channels to really move that agenda forward, and making sure that at the very early stages, these two sectors are coming together. And additionally, our NGO assistance programs, we've consistently supported multi-sectoral programs, but we're really striving to see this kind of joint collaboration between these two sectors, and also other sectors for that matter too, because it allows our program teams to evaluate proposal ideas side by side, and ensuring that child protection and education activities are striving for the same shared goal, which is improved child well-being, but also really achieving their sector-specific outcomes, to not lose either one of those pieces to it. So I will conclude just to acknowledge that, while each donor certainly has their own individual requirements and priorities, we see that efforts like this position paper and others that create more evidence on why this matters can help really be a more strategic investment, will surely speak volumes across the donor community. So we just are really excited to sort of see where this goes from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. And yeah, I mean, it's great to hear what you're saying. And as you say, to bring that kind of strategic approach and right from the beginning. And I think there's a really important point that you just said there. Although there's collaboration, it doesn't mean that each sector loses their identity. And I guess sometimes that might be a kind of fear. So I think it's a really important point. And, great that you are advocating with other donors, because as you say, that also, if there's different donors having different approaches. So really, really good to hear that. We've got about 20 minutes remaining, so I'm just going to ask Mark to briefly reflect on, having listened to the other panelists, what would he sort of say are the kind of key lessons learned, thinking back to our position paper, and then we'll open up the floor for a few questions. And again, apologies that we won't have as much time for the Q&A as we hoped, but look forward to future discussions. Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Kate. And yes, firstly, thank you to our panelists, Elise, Kuja, and Kelly. Yeah, so we one of the best things that we've seen is that everything that's been talked about, the examples that have been given, really align with our findings in the position paper. And I think you just summarised a couple of points as you went along, Kate. But really, for me, all the panelists there, their approach was really putting children at the centre and having child well-being as kind of the ultimate outcome. And I think that can be really unifying across the sector. As a child rights framework, using the socio-ecological framework, this helps all sectors see, almost like a theory of change, that the work they're doing is contributing overall to improve child well-being and healthy development. And I think we like to include healthy development because that really includes the cognitive development of a child that education programs can bring. And yeah, really like the reflection that came through about, cross-sector collaboration has to happen from the start with program design onwards through the program cycle. And it's really good to hear Kuja's practical examples of how they've been doing that in the field in Cameroon and some of the results. And I know there's some questions there for him that have come through in the chat as well. I think also what I wanted to mention was that I wanted to mention the work that the clusters have been doing, the Global Education Cluster and the CPAOR, because they've also produced a collaboration in coordination framework to support clusters to work together. And for me, that's a really important area of influence, because if we can get joint and integrated programming in the response plans for the country, the refugee response plans or the humanitarian response plans, then that kind of sets out what the response should look like. And that's what donors need to fund and implementers deliver. So as well as having some really strong agency-specific approaches like we've seen today, and having donors pushing the agenda like we see with BPRM, working through the clusters as well to encourage joint programming is a great lever to influence change. And yeah, I know we mentioned before, we're looking to kind of soft pilot the collaboration toolkit with partners over the summer, and then have the revised version out for a more large-scale pilot in autumn. So we may come back to some of the attendees today to see if there are people who are interested in piloting this and giving us some constructive feedback, so we can pull together a resource which reflects the needs of practitioners in the field and is usable, something people want to work with, and helps them to encourage joint and integrated programming. Yeah, thanks, Kate. That's it from me. I'm happy to take any questions. I see there's some in the chat there.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Mark. And as you say, thanks to all our panelists, to Elise, to Gunja and to Kelly. But you're not done yet. There's some questions for you, so we'll be coming back. I'm actually going to start with a question we've been pulling out questions, so I'm going to pick out a few. We're going to start with a question that was from Rebecca Fernandez, directed to Kunja. So Kunja, the question was, how do the two sectors, education and child protection, kind of impact on the child? And I think this question is about day to day, because Rebecca is asking, could you give an example in the day of the life of a child going to one of your peace programs that you mentioned? So maybe briefly, if you could actually say at the level of the child how the programming works. So Kunja, if you'd be able to respond to that. Kunja, I don't know if you can hear me. You're muted, so we can't hear you. Okay, I don't know if Kunja can hear me or not, so maybe I'll go to another question and we can come back to that one. So, oh, hi, Kunja. Yeah, go ahead. So the question.
I didn't get the question.
The question was
cut off, just got back.
Oh, no, yeah. Technology is great, but also frustrating. So the question was from Rebecca Fernandez, and she was asking, like, maybe could you just speak just briefly on, for a child who's part of your program, the peace program, what does their day look like? So how do the education and child protection come together in their day? Because I think that's quite an interesting, because we're talking about centering this on the child.
Thank you. I don't know if you are getting me.
Yep, we're hearing you. Thank you.
Hello. Okay. We're trying this integrated program to support both children who are in school and maybe they are about to drop out from schools, and the ones who are out of schools children. So in the schools we have the personnel, the teachers in the schools, they have received trainings, basic trainings on safeguarding and child protection issues, and they are able to do a pre-identification of some of the vulnerable children. And we have child protection staffs who are supporting these schools, and they can easily identify children in the schools who have some vulnerabilities and are about to drop out from schools, so that they could address these needs. And we put in place the psychosocial group discussions, and if sometimes, if needed, they can even receive individual case management. For children who are out of school, we have a community mechanism which could help to identify them. Then the child protection team could pay a home visit to these children, try to assess their vulnerability, and some of them could directly go back. They can support them to go back to formal schools, or they can be referred to HLSs, to the safe healing spaces for some additional support before they have access to schools. So we are covering, in fact, all the children who are on the site. I don't know if the response is okay. Hello?
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to know how, you know, how the kind of point of contact with children and how they're engaged. So thank you very much for giving that closer insight into how you're connecting with the children. And then maybe I'm going to go to a question that is addressed about the position paper, but I think it could also, if other panelists would like to respond, it's a question from Emma Bono about, it says there's a lot of protection programming happening with youth under child protection, and also high numbers of adolescents and youth not engaged in education. Emma her question, she was reflecting that she would like to have seen some youth-focused programming featured in the position paper, because youth often fall through the cracks rather. So I wonder if she's a question to Mark, did this come up at all, and do you think there's scope to look at this, in the EIE child protection, how it interrelates to youth programming? So a question to Mark about position paper, but also to other panelists if you'd want to come in. Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Yeah, thanks, Emma. Nice to hear from you. So one of the challenges we had with developing the position paper and the framework as well was trying to, in some ways, limit the scope of it a little bit. And in discussion with the advisory group and INEE The Alliance, we were looking in the main at children attending formal education, so between 3 and 18 years. Now, that doesn't exclude youth programming, I know. Youth programming can start before that. But for the interests of brevity and maintaining the focus across INEE and the Alliance, we kind of restricted it to that age group. But within the framework drafts, we've also kind of tried to capture that perhaps we can do, once the framework is released and has been revised, piloted and revised, we can do a kind of addendum for youth, looking at how the findings of the position paper and the tools within the framework can be adapted for youth programming, and look at where there's that overlap and what can happen there. Very similar as well with early childhood programming, particularly 0 to 3, but even 3 to 5 as well, not specifically addressed in the paper, but something we recognize is a key area of multi-sector response. And again, perhaps there's opportunity to develop also a version of the framework that is more applicable for early years education too. So yeah, totally agree with you, Emma, and recognize it is a challenge for youth programming falling between sectors, even within agencies, where agencies might have specific youth programming sectors internally as well. And yeah, hopefully as the project progresses, we can develop some specific resources that address that too.
Thanks, Mark. And I think that Kurt Rhodes also put a similar question, so hopefully that addresses your question as well, Kurt. And certainly INEE is doing work on youth education, and as Mark said, we can really think about having an addendum to the position paper. Maybe, I don't know if Elise, you wanted to come in on that in terms of that question in relation to the work with the refugee youth, or in particular. If not, I can go to another question, which I think is also for you.
Please go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, Elise, which, so the question is from Adela Phillips, who's saying that what role do we play in ensuring the mental health of children who have been subjected to such harsh conditions? And funds are absolutely necessary, but the strategies, and I think you spoke a bit about the 8 sort of strategies that you have in the work that UNHCR is doing. So how do we put these in place to ensure that, the mental health of children is supported? So.
Thank you, Adiola. I think this is a question that perhaps from the refugee perspective, or coming from the angle of UNHCR, I feel that we have perhaps been a bit relatively late to understanding the mental health impacts on children of their situation, and have very often focused on their physical well-being, and perhaps not always looked at that. But this is fortunately changing, and with this greater awareness, I think, from all sectors about the importance of mental health, then we're able to make more more progress on this. Concretely, again, for UNHCR, and I'm thinking because a lot of the situations where we work in, they are remote, they're inaccessible and quite hostile environments anyway. So it's difficult to do this, but anything that relates to play, and that's why the work of a lot of the partners that we support and who support us, like Save the Children, Terre des Hommes, make a really big difference and bring play into their work. We've also had some success with working in private sector partnerships and bringing funding through in that way. There was, in Dadaab in Kenya, there was a German NGO, German toy manufacturer who partnered, and they were able to provide learning toys for the schools, which just gave a way to structure play and provided a sort of an alternative. Then also ensuring that safe spaces continue to be safe. And I think, Mark, you spoke about that we shouldn't always assume that schools are safe spaces, and to be proactive in using that time and that opportunity to engage to also capacitate the learners, but also the teachers, and put in place some of the safeguards, so the referral pathways that allow access to services to support on psychosocial and mental health issues, but also to ensure that we keep these as safe environments. So pathways to report any sexual harassment or sexual exploitation and abuse. This is very important. And for UNHCR, it's part of our risk mitigation strategy to ensure that we have people, our colleagues are trained, our partners are trained, and we incorporate this into our risk registers. This is a bit of the dry side of it, Adeola, so it's not very interesting, but perhaps in terms of concretely. But if we have a safer environment, then at least whatever trauma or impact there has been, we can start to work with the children to heal. Thank you.
No, thank you. It's really helpful, really good response, and to give some more focused kind of thought about how to approach this. I've got a question now for Kelly, and also for others if are welcome to respond, but Kelly, is a question for you from Mackenzie from the Global Education Cluster, and she said you spoke about the competition between the two sectors for limited resources, and her question is, have you seen any promising or challenging examples of how this competitive element has been overcome, and do you see any kind of trends for larger pots for joint programming, and will that help address this competition that you identified?
Yeah, it's an important question. And it's a difficult one too, because as they noted, every donor has its own priorities and the way that they fund. I will say from PRM's perspective, we really value multi-sectoral programming. And as part of that, when we look at an education NGO proposal or a child protection proposal, we really are coming from the avenue of how do these two proposals or activities really support one another. And when we see proposals that are really singularly sector focused with no, an education program that's not really thinking about the protection components, or a child protection program that, for example, is proposing activities for school-age children during the school day without any acknowledgement of, well, what could we be doing instead to facilitate enrollment and retention in education? So when we see those kinds of issues, those are, that is not something that we're looking to fund anymore. We're really looking for that integration component. It doesn't necessarily mean that every project has to have both of these components, but the thought has to be there. How do these reinforce? How are we thinking about the child as a whole and supporting, really focusing on the well-being? And I liked the focus on healthy development, which I think brings in that mental health component, which is very, very important, because we know that without one of these components, the other components are not going to reach their full potential. So for our perspective, when we're looking at country-specific NGO proposals, we are really evaluating them with that context. And then, like I said, talking about really working with our UN partners, because the large majority of funding is getting funneled through these huge appeals. So it's essential that our partners are really planning for this at the very early stages to facilitate that trickle-down effect. So I think that's really quite important. I think we're also seeing, a greater awareness of how these two sectors can collaborate better and work together more. I think with the evolution of Education Cannot Wait, for example, really thinking a lot more strategically about protection. That's a big resource pot, and to really be able to bring the protection principles into the programming, I think is a really great opportunity. And I think we need to make sure that we're really being strategic in our planning for these. We know that the greatest way to improve education is really supporting teachers and school administration, but we also need to recognize that it's a lot to take on all of these issues. And so we need to be able to adequately resource and staff these programs to get at these joint outcomes that we talk about. And from a donor perspective, we see that as an essential piece of our role in supporting and making sure that the staff and resources are there to be able to do this kind of programming in an effective way.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. And I think maybe, if I could just add to that, I think overall we need to be, having continued advocacy around the financing of education and child protection, because we know both sectors in humanitarian response appeals are significantly underfunded. So I think it's, it's great to have a donor that's leading the way and encouraging other donors. And I think for all of us, and as you say, the UN agencies and all the different actors that are involved, it's really important that we keep that message. And I think that's why this initiative, this work we've been trying to do is really lift this up. And we've got a couple of minutes left, so I won't give any more questions, but I'd like to offer the floor to each of our panelists, to Lise, to Kunja and to Kelly, and then to Mark, just if you've got any final comments about this work that you'd like to share, just briefly in kind of 30 seconds before we wrap up. So can I hand over to UNHCR?
Okay, thank you. First of all, just very, very big thanks for the invitation and for the attention of the group. It's been really humbling to be able to speak to you. I think for what I can see in the region, in one of the challenges is to make sure that we continue to have the resources for child protection staff and to make a stronger link between child protection and all the sort of the more development angle outcomes that are motivating and that often people are looking for. I mean, if I can just speak again on behalf of refugees and IDPs, people don't want to remain in those conditions, in those situations, and usually education is what families and what children see as their hope and as their avenue to a better future for themselves and for their communities. And it's also a way of healing, getting back their autonomy, their independence, their sense of agency. And you can't do this. None of us can do this on our own. We all have a million small ways that we benefited from somebody giving attention to our education, and we're able to move forward from that. And we have so many inspiring stories. So I think it's just to really reinforce that we have to keep on looking at this as an area that it's not acquis, it's not achieved yet. Like that, it still requires a lot of dedicated people and attention to it to make sure that all the other elements are present to facilitate the best outcome. Thank you very much. And Mark, thank you also.
Thank you, Lisa. It's been really great to have UNHCR's perspective and your participation. So I really appreciate everything you've said. And as you said, this work is in its, it's not new, as Hani said at the beginning, but is still in a really important phase. Kunja, can I hand over to you for maybe, very quick final comment if you'd like to share anything? Can you hear me, Kunja? Can you you're muted. I just wanted to give you the opportunity if you wanted to say a final word. Okay, I'm gonna move on to Kelly, if that's okay, because I'm not sure Kunja, I think sometimes his connection, he said, is going in and out. So Kelly, if you had like 15-30 seconds final word, because we're over time. So
Hello.
Yeah, of course. So just to echo my thanks for pulling this together, and really excited to see where it goes. And I'll just say that I think, you know, it may not be new, but I think we have a new renewed sense of urgency to get this right, given the COVID response. You know, we've seen a really tremendous impact on children. And I think that it's essential that we're using every resource we can to really help children build back stronger. And I think that this collaboration is a critical piece of that.
Thank you, Kelly. We really appreciate your participation and the work that PRM is doing in this. And as you say, and I think Hanny said that at the beginning, this work has started before COVID, but you know, we've really seen a kind of heightened importance of it for COVID. Kunja, I think you came online then, so I don't know if you can come back on quickly. And thank you to everybody for just bearing with us for a few more minutes. Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. And sorry, my network was really bad. So plus I can say that education usually has a long reach in terms of targeted children, whilst CP needs sometimes more child protection needs more deeper impact. That means we have to train all the staffs and to get a lot of child protection staffs on the ground to do the work, and starting up an integrated child protection and education programs requires to carry out a joint need assessment with both sectors, using tools developed by both sectors too. And that will help right at the beginning to have staff members performing roles in both sectors. So usually it needs funding and time to have all this in place. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, very true. Thank you so much for your participation, Kunja. It was really interesting to hear about IRC's work, and we're really grateful that you joined us today. So Mark, maybe in 15-30 seconds, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think huge thanks to the panelists, and their summaries there were very excellent, and it's wonderful to see such work being done to encourage and support cross-sector collaboration very meaningfully at all these different levels. And I think just a final point from me, you know, we've had the focus on putting the children at the center, child well-being, healthy development, and that message has been hammered home. But also, I think we need to listen to children, and we haven't spoken about that so much today. But, you know, we know that what children want is to feel safe and protective, and what they want most when they're asked in situations of crisis is an education, a chance for an education. So what we're doing, what we're trying to do is to respond to what children and their families want most. And by working together, I think the two sectors can really then respond to the needs and wishes of the children, help them realize their rights, and help them move towards a brighter future with healthy development and child well-being at the center. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. That's a wonderful way to wrap up. And just thanks again to all the panelists and to everyone who joined us today. And I'm sorry we've gone over. I'm sorry for the technical challenges at the beginning, but I think it's been a really rich and important discussion. As Honey said, Mark is leaving us and we're going to miss him. And we're really grateful for all the work he's done. Just to say, even though Mark is leaving us, the work is going to go on. We hope you'll continue supporting it. And we will actually be recruiting for Mark's replacement. It's a 5-month consultancy, so if you know anybody. But thanks to everybody for today. Really very, very grateful. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.